Good morning, everyone. My name is Khusainova, and I work at Airbnb. But as Oliver mentioned, prior to that, I was working at many startups, including Twitter and Ship. And I kind of want to give you a little bit of a preview or sneak peek into what the startup culture is like there and how do we think about design. And today I want to talk to you about designing the pivots. So we're going to cover what is a pivot and how design for pivot is different and why should we care, and design processes and strategies in place when thinking about designing for pivot. Well, let's start with answering the question, well, what is a pivot? Well, it was defined by Eric Ries in his book, Pivot is a method for developing businesses and products by changing its direction. Basically, there's a lot goes to understanding how and why companies decide to change what they've been working on, but kind of like simplified version of it can be seen in a diagram like this. First, you identify your customers, and you build personas based on their habits and routine, what you learn about your customer, and then you define a problem and you build a solution. That's when you generate hypotheses at this stage, and you try to validate those hypotheses based on data or customer interviews. And then comes the moment of truth when you think, well, now what? And if the hypotheses that you had were correct, you just continue building. Congratulations, you kind of nailed it, and you can continue working on the product that you initially worked on. But we're more interested in the case when things didn't really go as planned, and something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the customer segment wasn't identified correctly, or maybe the problem or solution weren't quite right, and so the company decides to pivot into something else. There are many pivots out there, and some of the most well-known are Groupon. Groupon started as this company called The Point, which was a social good fundraising website. Basically, the idea was that people would pledge a certain amount of money into fundraiser, and if they get the certain amount, they get to the goal, they will fund the fundraiser. And then Andrew Mason started this project on the side called Groupon, which would be based on the same kind of idea of people pledging money into deals, and that's basically the website that we know today, the Daily Deals website, which was way more successful than the initial idea. Probably the most kind of legendary pivot in social media world is Twitter. Twitter was first the company called Adele, which was a podcast subscription network. But since iTunes came out, kind of the team realized that there is no way they can compete with iTunes. And so basically the team was given 2-week sprint in order to figure out how, like, what do they want to do going forward? What is that would be way more interesting to their customers, and what is that would keep their company running? And so Jack Dorsey and B. Stone came up with the idea of this social status update website that we know as Twitter today. Another kind of like well-known pivot is Pinterest, that started first as the company called Toad. That was basically retail's catalog and sale updates website. People were putting items in a catalog and sharing with their friends. And then the company founders kind of realized that actually people were more interested in putting items in catalogs more than anything else. And they decided to make it a photo collection service instead, where people, as you know, can share photos with anybody, and it took off way more than the initial idea. Another company kind of known in the startup world in Silicon Valley that pivoted recently is on-demand consumer shipping service, Ship. They started as very consumer-focused, mobile-first product. They were only servicing 4 cities in the United States: San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. And in 2016, they decided to pivot. They decided to go nationwide, so service the whole country. And they decided to switch to a different type of customer, which is a business customer. And so they bulk print, shipping label printing platform and price comparison service became their core experience. Not only in the digital world, Pivot exists in the physical world as well, and today Suzuki probably best known for their high-performance motorcycles and sports cars, but from 1910 to 1935, Suzuki was known as inventor of loom machine that would supply Japan's silk industry. So why do startups pivot? As, again, Eric Ries puts in his book, basically, successful entrepreneurs had the foresight and ability to kind of see what of their strategies worked brilliantly and which ones were misguided and needed adjusting and adapting. There are a lot of different types of pivots. Some of them are zoom in and zoom out pivot. That's basically happens when feature of the product becomes the whole product. It kind of like takes over what was previously the product that the team was working on, or the other way around, the product becomes just a feature of a bigger product. An example of that could be Company X came up with the idea of social networking app and realized that their photo filters that their users are able to put on the photos that they're sharing was the most desired feature of the product. And so they realized that that actually was something that they want to work on and pivot into filter set instead. Customer segment pivot, that was relatively straightforward when the company tries to go after too many different customer types and they actually decide that they want to focus on this one specific type of customer and really solve the user problem for them. An example, company Y built a social network app, and that would allow users to privately share photos with their friends and family. And what they realized that kind of like the early adopters of the app and the people, the user segment that uses the app the most is young parents with kids. And so they decide to really focus and kind of build features for private family sharing app that would only be focused on like this specific type of a customer. Platform technology pivot. Sometimes company can trim the cost down by switching to a different type of technology or going from an app to a service or the other way around. An example of that, in the 19th century, they were producing playing cards in Kyoto, Japan. In 1966, they moved into the toy industry. And in 1975, they began creating video games. Do you guys know which company I'm talking about? You got it. So why is designing for pivot different? Well, it's not that different. A lot of these processes and strategies that we're going to talk about can be used in just a large-scale project that you work on. There's a lot of similarities. A pivot, like a regular product, follows the same process of customer discovery, hypothesis generation, build, and launch. Pivot has to be validated to ensure that it actually solves the user need, and it can become a sustainable business going forward. And design for a pivot involves creating a new set of design system, or maybe evaluating the existing one if you already have one. But it is different. Designing for a new user base within an existing ecosystem. So, for example, if you go from kind of the customer segment type of pivot that we looked at previously, you really need to make sure that whatever the service you had with existing users that were using your service, maybe you had the operations side of things, kind of physical operations and the third-party services that you use, so existing ecosystem in place, and you realize that you want to actually build new user personas that would use your service. You need to make sure that you don't confuse existing users and you also serve the new users at the same time. Designing within a short lean startup timeline to validate new hypotheses. Oftentimes when the company pivots, it's, most of the time, it's because something worked really well and the company really wants to kind of like nail that one thing down and build on that feature, or because something goes badly, and it's oftentimes the case. And so you don't really have this indefinite amount of time to build the new product because you're probably running out of money, or maybe you're losing your customers, so you really need to make sure that whatever you do, you need to iterate on it quickly so you can actually continue building the product. So the diagram that we looked at yesterday, every step here would be really trimmed down to really short amount of time. And you still need to produce a high-quality product. You need to satisfy your users, but it's going to be way more in a shorter period of time than it would have been if you were just building from scratch. And design for Pivot is following established brand guidelines. So oftentimes you already have a product, and it probably already has the brand guidelines, depending on how young your company is. And you need to make sure that if you create something new, it's totally justified. Or if you leverage existing brand guidelines, then how do you bring that over into the new product? And we're going to look at this into more details. So as I mentioned, that would be a balance between following existing guidelines and creating something new. So let's look at the design processes and strategies when thinking about design for a pivot. And while looking at that, we're going to look at the case study of SHIP. SHIP is a service that went from being very specific in 4 cities in the United States to being nationwide company that would allow users to price compare different shipping carriers, print shipping labels, request the pickup on demand to pick up their shipping items. And they went from being very consumer-based, mobile-first app to being platform on web and mobile. So what was changing in case of SHIP? As I mentioned, there was a new user base. They went from being very consumer-focused, kind of like people would ship one-off items just for Christmas to friends and family, or something that would want to return something that they bought previously in online and offline. So really like kind of like consumer-focused world, and consumer features were built, versus being servicing businesses that would have just tremendous amount of shipping going on every day. They would have their own setup, pickup schedule, and they would require a completely different set of features to be built for them. They went to new platform. As I mentioned, businesses have this massive amount of stuff that they would want to ship. And oftentimes they already use tools that they would set up their online stores with, like Shopify and eBay or other platforms, and they really would prefer to kind of like stay on the same platform, maybe switching tabs at the same time. And so in order to satisfy kind of their use case, Ship needed to pivot into different platform. They did still support their mobile app. It was a complete new set of features. Price comparison engine was built specifically for this new product. Bulk actions when, again, as a business, you need to be able to process a massive amount of shipments at once. In order to do that, you don't want to do this kind of like one-off. You want to select multiple items and process them at the same time. And so this bulk action functionality was built specifically for this new product, as well as edit sidebar that we're going to look into more details kind of when we get to the interface part, where you can edit item based on kind of like what is that, whether or not you're missing maybe item dimensions, or you need to fill in the international declaration. So that would all happen in the sidebar, which obviously did not exist in the mobile app. And they expanded the coverage area. As I mentioned, they went from just servicing 4 cities in the United States to servicing the whole country. A lot of things stayed the same, though. For example, the shipping industry, shipping domain. Ship did not change that. So all the knowledge that had previously been developed was still preserved. And initial branding guidelines, color and typography, that's something that we used from the existing product. We did have to change quite a few things. For example, typography was really focused on mobile. It was big, chunky text, big UI elements. And in order to, kind of like when you move to desktop, you have all this real estate you want to benefit from. And we had to condense spacing and decrease the typography size so that we can really take advantage of the real estate on web and make sure that it's still readable and people can still kind of like see what's going on there and understand the information hierarchy there, but at the same time, it needed to be really tweaked for this new product. The team and expertise. It was pretty much the original team, engineering team included, which really helped build the product in a short timeline faster. So what is design process for this type of situation when you really need to kind of like move in really fast? Well, let's look at the usual design process, we know it. First, you define the problem, you define your customer and the problem that you want to solve for them. You ideate on the potential solution, you go wide and try to understand like what are all the different possibilities you can solve this problem with. And then once you decide on how exactly you want to pursue it and what is that you want to build, you design and prototype your solution and you validate it with your customers to make sure that that's actually what you think the answer to that problem should be. You build a solution with your engineering team, and you make sure that it's implemented as designed. It's always a good idea to stick around when the implementation step is happening. And you launch the solution to your customers, and you actually see how people use it and what kind of feedback they're giving you in real time. How would that process be different for Pivot? Well, first of all, you need to answer the question, is there a new type of user? Is there a new user segment? Because it will all basically be different from there. And if there is not, do you even need this phase? Maybe you already know everything that you need to know, and you just need to change things further in the tunnel. What features do you want to build? Whether for a new customer or for existing customer, or maybe you want to reuse some of the features that you already had from the original product. How much do you already know? Maybe you know everything about your existing customer or about the industry. You kind of need to figure out where there's the gap in the knowledge for this new product that you're building. Can we leverage the same customer base for validation? In the case of Ship, for example, we had business customers that were using our mobile app, consumer app, as I mentioned, and they were really kind of like hacking around it. They were trying to process these shipments one-off because they really wanted to use the service, but we realized that it was not ideal for them at all because they really had to manually enter it, no integration with their existing platforms whatsoever. When we decided that we want to pivot into businesses, we realized that we can just reach out to them and ask them for their feedback and what pain points did they have and what didn't work for them. And so we did that. It was a huge asset in this process. In the build phase, you need to answer the question, do you want to follow the same brand guidelines or do you want to create something new? Do you want to reuse some of the existing ones? And in the launch phase, how do you communicate your change to your customers? And how do you not confuse existing users with this new product that you're building? But at the same time, you kind of go out there and say, hey, me and my team worked really hard for this new product, and I really want you to try it out. But it's not what as you knew Ship before. Let's look at each of these steps in more detail. So define phase. You need to answer the question if there is a new user segment. And if it is, then what is this segment? How these people, these users are different from your existing users and what type of problem they have. What features do they want that don't exist in the current product? And again, going out and asking these questions to your existing users or new users that you might be going after for is really something that was really a huge asset for us. Just really getting on the phone and talking to customers and understanding the way that they think about services and the way that they use other tools and the way that their shipping life is was really important for us to kind of build the features for this new product. And the outcome of this phase would be building user personas that you designed for. Totally found this picture on the internet, but basically what it represents is users. You really should make it more as tangible as you can give them names, give them professions, come up with a kind of routine and what they do on a day-to-day basis. It just makes them more kind of like tangible examples and builds empathy for people you're designing for. And it helps communicate with your stakeholders as well, saying like we really should be focused on this type of a user because Michael has this problem that we want to solve. And Michael might be somebody who you actually talked on the phone, one of your customers. Ideation phase. Generate new hypotheses. If you decide to go after a new customer, there is really no way you can just kind of like use what you already thought about your user. The business use case was really different from consumer use case in many ways. And so you really need to generate new hypotheses and try to validate them with your product. Bring in domain expertise. Again, in the case of ship, we were still with an existing shipping domain, and we knew a lot about shipping rates, carriers, label printing, international declaration filling, packaging. And so we brought all of that expertise into our new product and tried to apply to our new type of customer. And learn from mistakes of the original product. What didn't work? The reason you pivoted is because something didn't quite work for your original product. And so what can you learn from that experience and what can you bring into this new world? Make sure you talk to existing customers and get feedback on the existing product as well. They're going to tell you all about it, even something that you didn't want to hear, didn't ask for, but it's really important to kind of like hear that feedback firsthand. And the outcome of this phase is sketches and wireframes of the new product. An example of what we came up for ship, it looked kind of different from what we ended up doing. Well, similar, but different. We used it for testing on early stages with the users, kind of try to communicate the potential experience and how they could potentially be interacting with the product and getting their feedback on what made sense or not. It also helped a lot with engineering scoping, and so the team could start building this without kind of trying to think high level without us going into actual design phase yet. As well as the user flows. Really important to kind of like, in order to understand the user journey and how many steps the user will have to go through in order to perform an action, in this case, printing a label or scheduling a pickup. It was a challenge to kind of try to eliminate the number of steps, but it really helps to understand, like, are there any steps that you can combine? Maybe some of these screens or pages, they don't need to go through. Maybe some of them are redundant, something that you can bring into other pages. Also walk the user through this diagram and try to kind of explain that these are the steps that you will have to go through. What do you think about it? How does it feel like? Does it feel like too many or not enough? Just really trying to kind of like understand what the experience would look like with this new product. Prototype phase. Really crucial for pivots. If you design something that you're going to build really, really soon in a short time frame, you want to really understand if that's the product that you're building is actually usable. So putting together quick prototypes, high-fidelity prototypes, hopefully, that people can click through and give you feedback on it before the engineering starts building. It really goes a long way. So what goes into this phase? It's actually designing the solution. It's recruiting users to validate your solution, and it's constantly learn and iterate based on the feedback. It's really important to iterate quickly. So, for example, for Ship, we were basically on the phone with customers, and we had a few sessions scheduled back to back. And for the next one, we would already tweak it based on the previous feedback from the previous session we just went through. And you need to really make sure it makes its way back to the original, like the idea that you're actually going to be building with your team going forward. And the outcome of this phase is a clickable prototype and high-fidelity designs that your engineering team can actually build. An example of the prototype that we built for Ship, we basically tried to validate this discoverability of this new feature when users click on the icon with a little counter there to view more information about the kind of like all the items in this order. Again, for the business customer, they oftentimes one item would contain multiple items within it. So it would be like multiple items in the order, for example. So I wanted to make it in a way that they don't need to view all the information at the same time, but they can if they want to before they ship it. So we did the clickable prototypes really quick in Framer.js in order to get the feedback on how discoverable that feature was. Build phase. Lay the scalable foundation and design system to make sure that whatever you design kind of like makes sense in a bigger system design, and you can build on top of that going forward, new features of your product, or maybe another pivot if you have to. Make sure that your foundation is solid and your system is scalable. Work with your engineering to implement the solution. You can design the most beautiful experiences in the world, but if they're not built the way that you imagine them, what's the point? And certainly iterate on your system and stress test it. Make sure that it actually is scalable, and oftentimes kind of like the way that you think about the components and the way you were imagining them working might not necessarily make sense during the implementation phase. So you need to adapt to make sure that it's actually scalable from the engineering perspective as well. And the outcome of the build phase is the product. So this is Ship Web that we built and launched last year. It maintains the brand, the original brand of Ship, but it's quite different in certain ways. For example, as I mentioned, the typography was changed. We still use the same graphic font that was our original brand's font, but we had to change it. We had to kind of shrink it down in order to satisfy kind of like the dense nature of the table view on web. And we had to tweak a certain kind of rules around how we use colors. For example, the green would always be a primary color. On the page would be the main button that you will be clicking, for example, for creating a shipment, but the blue button would always mean that that's the actionable thing that would take you to the next page. For example, purchasing a label or schedule an item for pickup. And the launch phase, the last one. You build awareness of your pivot to make sure that people out there know that that's what you've been working hard on, and that's what you want your users to really try. You build these new services for them. Distinguish between the old product and the pivot. It's really important to kind of like not confuse the users, that they know that this is something new that you've been working on. In the case of Ship, we didn't really have kind of like a new name for it, really. It was just Ship on Web. And so to really like make sure that people don't assume that it's just the same product that was ported over to a web platform, you really need to kind of go out there and write articles about it, blog about it, tweet about it. Go out to the community and say that, hey, this is what we've been working on, and you should give it a shot. Tell us what you think. Communicate clearly with your customers. Have a call with them, email them, send them cookies, and tell them like, hey, this is the new product that we built just for you. For our business customers, we did that, and kind of like make sure that our early adopters try our app early, and so they give us feedback on it. We wrote an article about it in Product Hunt, and I believe TechCrunch as well, to kind of like build awareness of this new product, and we got good traction from the community. So what are the design principles? What kind of I learned going through this process of quickly and rapidly kind of changing the direction of the company and like thinking through all the possible use cases for this new type of a customer. As we went through the actual process, let's look at them on a high level. First, you need to understand the new journey. And by this, I mean not necessarily new user journey, but like this whole new product journey. And in order to do that, you should not really make assumption on the old user segment or on the old product that you've been working on, because chances are it will be quite different. And you need to create or evaluate the design principles that you had for the original product, and see if you can use some of them on your new product, or if they need to completely be scratched and started over. So, interviewing the customers in order to understand this new journey, this new kind of like new problem that you're trying to solve. Again, our business customers were kind of like hacking our mobile app, and we really wanted to understand what did they like so much about Ship that they wanted to use it, even though it was so painful, and what they would want to see in this new product. Kind of how can we acquire this new type of customer on a broader scale? And oftentimes, these people were kind of like a lot of our existing business customers were makers of things that, like they maybe jewelry makers, or they design clothes, and they really don't want to deal with shipping that much. That's like their least favorite part. And they really want to trust it with, shipping experts. They want to just go back and do the thing that they like the most, which is creation or, art or whatever that is. And so they really like trying to understand this routine of theirs. Like they would have somebody come into their door and pick stuff up with USPS, the United States Postal Office service that we have in States. Kind of like trying to understand what their routine and schedule is like, informed a lot of features that we built for this new product. So on a high level, we leverage the existing business customers that we're using Ship app in order to understand what the new features we should be building. We had 8 interviews in 2 stages during like define and the prototype phase. Define to really understand the customer problem, and the prototype phase to understand whether or not the product that we're building is usable. And we use storyboards to kind of like represent the new user journey. Just put the post-its and see what are the different steps they go through, from all the way from thinking about their new product that they're creating, to putting something online, to selling it, and to scheduling shipping, or thinking about shipping it, packaging, and what are the steps that the Ship can kind of like plug in and try to optimize. For example, importing orders from the existing platform that they're used already. What about existing users, though? Ship had a big kind of like consumer base that we didn't want to lose either. But in this new world, we didn't really focus on the consumer. And although Ship consumer app was still maintained, we were fixing bugs and making sure that it's working for our consumers, no new features were built for consumers, and certain features we actually had to shut down. That's the nature of a pivot. For example, Ship had this feature called Ship Return, when you can return the item that you purchased somewhere online. If that service didn't have a return functionality, you can just snap a photo of it, and just as long as you have a return label, you can do it. So we didn't maintain that feature going forward. And we allowed both segments, business and consumer, to use our new product. So if you were a consumer and you really wanted to just ship something one-off, you could totally do it. There was no subscription model for this new product. So you can just use it just as if you were a business. And in order to understand the new user journey, you need to create design principles because they probably will be different from the original design principles for the original product. And just to make sure that we have the terminology straight, design principles are a set of rules and guidelines defining how the product should look, feel, and operate, and the reason behind your design decisions. And why do we want to create design principles? Well, there's a lot that goes in there, and on a high level, you want to support your design decisions. When you know why exactly you made or designed things a certain way, like what is the reason behind it, it kind of makes it easier to create every new thing for this new product. It just makes it easier because you know it's supported by this certain principle that you try to aspire to. It makes it easier to communicate your decisions with the broader team. Your engineers, your product managers, your stakeholders, your customers, if they know that you designed it because, again, you try to aspire to a certain principle in your design system, it just makes it easier to communicate it. It makes the system unified and work as expected because it's just built upon a certain principle, just makes it consistent, and creates a sense of trust with the users. So what were the design principles of SHIP? Users in control. That was something that we strived for all times. Starting with the original product, we wanted to give the user the control over all the decisions that they make. We deeply believed in the necessity to give kind of like the full control over any decision that they make, whether it's clicking a button or selecting certain filters. We wouldn't pre-select anything for them unless we knew that they were the default settings. But we were guiding them through this decision-making process and helping them along the way. Simplicity. The system should really be intuitive and easy to use and simple, with one main atomic call to action per page. That said, it should still provide necessary tools for the user to successfully complete the task. Transparency, all the way from new shipment creation to tracking to delivery to the consumer. Need to make sure that kind of like the user knows like where the shipment is at any point in time. So we build things like tracking, sharing of your track information with your recipient. And so that was extremely important for businesses because they wanted to be able to share their track information with their customers. And it was something that we built kind of like the easy to access functionality because we really wanted to be transparent with our users. Trust. Although the user should remain in control, we should provide sensible defaults and anticipate their needs and provide the consistent experience. And the feedback. The system should provide meaningful feedback. User get themselves in error state. We really should make sure that they can get out of that error state and understand all the options available to them. Were these principles different from the original product? They were, for example, the simplicity principle was really unique to desktop app because there's so many things you can do on desktop. Our mobile app was really kind of always focused on one action at a time, but on desktop we really need to make sure that with the use of color and typography we communicate that this is one action that you need to be doing right now, and this is how you progress forward. Pivot principle number 2, diverge from the existing product. Use your domain expertise. In the case of SHIP, it was the shipping domain, but define a new set of requirements and solutions based on new user segment or new hypothesis that you built. I just really like this picture. It's a ship van that would deliver packages to our users. But basically what it communicates is that we had established system in place, established domain knowledge that we were preserving with this new label printing product. So things like shipping rates, address, domestic, international, all the rules that go in there for address validation. There's a lot, I can tell you. Tracking and logistics, label printing, like how do you generate labels, what do you put on a label, if it's international, it's going to be a different type of a label. Warehouse management. SHIP had an operation side of things, so the whole physical operation in the warehouse, and kind of using that knowledge while building this new product was extremely important. But do define a new set of requirements for the new product. For example, how much does the new customer want to be involved? As I mentioned, business people, at least the business people that were using SHIP, they didn't really want to be hand-holding the shipping process. They wanted to trust us to do this for them. And oftentimes kind of like thinking that, well, the user really needs to like click 2 buttons in order to be able to ship. something, and then everything happens behind the scenes for them. That's kind of like the premise that we're going off here. And another one is, do we want to offer the packaging for our business customers? It was really important and very desirable feature for consumers because they oftentimes don't have any packaging in their house and they just want to ship something. But business customers prefer to have kind of their branded packaging because that's the way that they advertise their product. So really the packaging was an interesting case for businesses. And do we utilize our existing operational model? As I mentioned, the ship went nationwide, and before it was only 4 cities in the United States. And so there was a question, well, do we want to expand to more cities? Do we want to leverage our existing operational model? Kind of how do you want to think about that? And so in the end, we allowed people to actually be able to drop off their shipments themselves or schedule pickups. So they really had options available to them. Invest in designing a system. I cannot stress enough how important that is to actually be able to lay the foundation, the system foundation for your product. And it just creates consistency for the new product, and it saves time in the end for both you and your team. Oftentimes, pivot is very time constrained, but it's still super important to make sure that you have a system in place. So in the case of Ship, we designed a scalable system that would allow us kind of like build more features as we go. Initially, we only had 3 pages with pending shipments that are about to go out, shipments that were sent or delivered to you in the shipments tab, which would be a separate page. But the way we're thinking about it is regardless of what page you're on, you always have the shipments table. It would adapt based on what what page you're on right now and what kind of information you need to know and to see at that time. For example, on the pending table, you need to be able to edit the shipment before you ship it, put in international declaration, weight and dimensions. In the shipments table, you want to know the tracking information. So that's what you want to see. And you have a sidebar in place, and it's going to be either editable or viewable depending on what page you're on. And the big blue button would always indicate how do you progress forward. How to design a scalable system? Well, you need to think holistically about your product and think about like what kind of like how does this fit, how the elements that you design fit into like a bigger system. Establish design principles, as we talked about. Apply knowledge from our original product. If there is something that you learned from building the previous product, the original product, apply it here. But diverge if you have to, and work with your engineering team to implement your design. And kind of like on a high level, this system, the building the scalable system can be looked into like at 3 steps. I'm going to run a little bit over time as well. Step 1, lay the system foundation. As I mentioned, we did have certain kind of like basic atomic elements like colors and typography that we took from the original product, but we changed it a little bit in order to kind of satisfy our new requirements. Design the components. When you kind of look at your system, at your design, you oftentimes can see that certain elements keep repeating. There's the rate card that would always show you the carrier and the price and the action to continue with this rate. It kind of being used across multiple pages, and you can design it in a way that it always looks the same, and it's always like the user always know how to interact with it. Or the item, regardless whether it was manually created shipment, it was imported from somewhere, it was delivered to you. It will always have the photo of the item if it has the photo, which is a blank space with kind of a template, a placeholder there. The item will always have name, tracking information, maybe short description. So kind of always thinking about like this in a way that can be applied in different places is super important and essential. And create a library. This was a hackathon project at Ship. Basically, we took all our components and put them in a library. These buttons that you see, they are actionable, so you can actually click on them and see the click state, the hover state, and it's actually interactive, so you could put you could like play with the code inside this little snippet area, and you can change it, and the button would change dynamically based on what you put in there. If you made an error, then you would kind of like there's nothing will be displayed there, and we'll provide sensible feedback. Like you probably have a error somewhere in your code, and so it was really important to kind of have that functional, like have this library available, so we can communicate what are the items that kind of what other tools available to designers and engineers if they want to build like new features on that product, as well as onboarding new team members. And so if I want you to kind of like walk away from 3 things today from my talk, it would be this. To summarize kind of design principles, understand the new journey. Don't make assumptions based on the old user segment, and define new design principles. Diverge from existing product if you have to. Use the domain expertise, but define new set of requirements for the new product that you're building. And invest in designing a system. It will be extremely important and make your product consistent, and will save time for you and your team at the end. Thank you, and I wish you best of luck with your pivots.